Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing part 182 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people be making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today we've got quite a cool assortment of animals, as typically always do, but we've got a particularly interesting one. Lots of interesting animals today. So we're going to be starting off with Great Cakes mod, who has been dominating the scene at the moment with a lot of really cool mods. We're going back to the Cretaceous, so we're going to have a look at the animal Vegasavis, I believe you say that. So let's have a look at this wonderful guy. So Vegasavis is a genus of extinct bird that lived in Antarctica during the Maastrichtian, so during the late Cretaceous, so between 69 to 68 million years ago. And it was originally considered one of the member of Aceriformes, or it was a type of waterfowl within the Galliforms, but actually some claims, we'll get into a little bit more about that as anyway. But the generic name, Vegasavis, comes from the name Vega Island, which is down in Antarctica, and then the species name, it's IAAI, or NAI, is an acronym for the Industrio Antarctica Argentino, the IAA, which is an Argentine scientific expedition that was into Antarctica. So the holotype itself is held in the Museo de la Planta in Argentina, and the specimen was found in 1993 in the Lopez del Medina Formation on Cape Lam on Venta Island. It was first thought to be a Pesperornid intermediate, and it was only described as a new species in 2005, and it was quite delicate, so it needed to be CT scanned. And then another specimen has been found, and was found beside the holotype. And looking at the CT scans of it, actually showed an intact syrinx of the specimen. So that's how a lot of birds make their sounds. So basically the voice box in this bird was completely intact. And it had an asymmetrical third segment. It actually suggested that Vegasavis had two sources of sound in the neck, along with the large soft tissue originated structures, and they were capable of honking like modern ducks, which is quite cool, and geese and other basal neonaths. And then in 2019, there was another femur isolated that was attributed to the species, but it is just the femur, so it's kind of hard to tell exactly. So yeah, that's the male there. I really love this reconstruction. I'm definitely a big fan of making it look like something distinct, but, fit in with modern birds. So I love to look at the female. So we'll talk a little bit of its classification. So it was previously thought to be a member of the stem group Aciniformes within the Galliforms, indicating that the representatives of some of these groups of modern birds, like, Aceriformes, waterfowl, gamefowl, and things like that, and also, potentially paedognaths and things like that were around during the Mesozoic. However, there have been some paleontologists that actually have questioned this, and even classified it as a neornithine bird, which is just outside the group of true birds, so it's not even a true bird in the sense, like, it's obviously very bird-like, but it's not aves or the true birds that we know them as. And even some studies have considered it to be in the family Vegalidae, to be sten group with an ornithoryn. Did we say that? And there is some evidence to suggest that most kind of studies have put it as mentioned as a basal neognath, or outside the ground, the ornithines, which is outside the crown group, or the group that we consider modern birds. It's been like that, but there's actually been a couple studies. There was one study that actually found it to be the sister taxon of Anantidae, which is ducks, in 2024, and there's been other studies. So it's kind of a couple have supported that being with a true bird, and then a few more have supported it being basically outside of the true birds. So it's kind of a very interesting little dichotomy there. And they got the paleobiology, so we'll have a look at that. Look at these cute little guys. So Vegasavis is a bird with high metabolism, which allowed it to live in Antarctica. It also shows a degree of osteosclerosis, a condition shared in birds, and which basically means their bones kind of densen. With polar illness, which means they can dive pretty well, so just that heavier bones allows them to sink better in the water and provide more diving behavior. But I've got to say, this little duck, little duck guy is so cute. I'm definitely a big fan of this mod. Great Cakes actually, I think, does a really good job with extinct animals, just because makes them look like an actual animal, rather than a lot of people make them not feel like an actual animal. But I think Great Cakes mod does a great job of making them like distinct and different, but also make them feel like an animal that could exist. So yeah, hats off to Great Cakes for making an awesome mod. And I love talking about more extinct mods. And luckily we do have another extinct mod today, but we'll get into that shortly. Next up, we've got another Great Cakes mod with a much bigger and more impressive bird this time. We have got the Andean Condor. So let's have a look at these guys here, having a fly there. Some of the new animations as well. So the Andean condor is a South American New World vulture and is the only member of the genus Vultur. It is found in the Andes Mountains and adjacent Pacific coasts of western South America. So it's a really cool bird. It was described by Carl Linnaeus in the 10th edition of Nature Germanica as Vultur griffinus, and that has pretty much stayed to the day. It's also called the Chilean condor, the Peruvian condor, and things like that. And the exact taxonomy placement has kind of been looking at is it shares like it's related to the 6 other species like the California condor of New World vultures with similar ecological roles to the Old World vultures, like the more typical ones that you see, like the griffins and the other vultures in Eurasia and Africa. But actually looking at how closely they're related, it actually believed to be more closely related to storks, which is interesting. And the Andean condor is the only accepted living species of its genus. Though unlike the California condor, which has an extensive fossil record, there's not a lot to show for the Andean condor. So the overall length of the Andean condor can range from about 100 to 130 centimeters, or about 3 feet to 4 feet. And standard measurements are quite cool. So they get to about a mean weights at 11 kilograms, with males reaching an average of about a kilo and more at 12 kilograms, and the females about 10 kilograms. So males are slightly bigger. They have the heaviest average weight of any living flying bird or animal, ahead of trumpeter swans and Dalmatian pelicans. However, some sources actually claim the mean body size is about 10 kilograms for the Andean condor, and is the largest living land bird capable of flight if measured by terms of average weight and wingspan. Although male buzzards of the larger species, like the Coati buzzard, which are much more sexually dimorphic, can weigh more, so it's very complicated to figure out who's the biggest and what's it. So this is the male. It's kind of obvious there, you can see it's a male. The mean wingspan is about 283 centimeters or 9 feet, but have a maximum wingspan of about 10 feet or about 3.3 meters. And the only birds that do exceed this, only the great albatross species and the 2 largest species of pelican, exceed that in average in terms of its its kind of size there. So there's a female there. The adult plumage you can see is all black, except for like a frill around the base of the neck in the males, and with large white bands on its wings, and they only appear after a bird's first molt. The head and neck are kept meticulously clean, and you can see like a reddish and black colour. And their baldness actually means the skin is more exposed to the sterilizing effects of dehydration and UV light. And the crown of the head is flattened, as you can see on the males. You can see is flattened in males and topped with a dark red comb, which is called canucle. And the skin hanging from the neck is called a wattle. Males also have yellower skin, and when condors are typically agitated, their heads and neck flush, which is a clear sign of animals nearby. And this flush of colour is actually especially intensive in dominant males and feeding carcasses. And the juveniles, which we can see over there, are like a greyish brown with a blackish head and brown ruff, which we'll have a look at when we talk about their breeding. The middle toe is actually also greatly elongated, and as the hind one is only slightly developed. And they're actually comparatively straight and blunt, which means they're more adapted for walking than perching, which is interesting. And their beaks are hooked, which is adapted for tearing into carcasses. And unlike most other species of modern birds of prey, the females are actually smaller than the males, as we kind of mentioned before. So in terms of their habitat, the Andean condor can be found in South America, in the Andes and the Santa Marta Mountains. We'll have a look at the female while we talk about their distribution, things like that. So here's a female, a little bit smaller. In the north, their range begins in Venezuela and Colombia, where it's very rare, and it continues to the Andes in Ecuador, Peru, Chile, Bolivia, and western Argentina. And in the early 19th century, they actually bred from western Venezuela to Tierra del Fuego along the entire chain, but this has actually been greatly reduced due to human activity. Their habitats are typically open grasslands in alpine areas up to about 5,000 meters in elevation. And they typically prefer open, non-forested areas, allow them to spot carrion from the air, such as rocky mountainous areas. And they occasionally range from the lowlands in eastern Bolivia, northern Peru, and southwestern Venezuela, and have been found actually seen over the lowland deserts of Chile and Peru, and over the southern beach forests of Patagonia. And actually, southern Patagonia, meadows are quite important for these condors, as they're likely to have herbivores present. And in this region, their distributions are indicated by the locations of meadows, as well as cliffs for roosting and nesting. So in terms of their kind of behavior, they soar like other species of vulture. They'll sprawl on their wings when they're held horizontally, and the primary feathers bent upwards. They do have not a very large sternum, so they don't have quite the big, large flight muscles that you'd expect for a bird like this. And they're primarily soaring. So they flap their wings on rising from the ground, but after attaining a good elevation, they actually flap really weirdly, and then they ride on the thermals. And actually, Charles Darwin actually measured that he watched condors for half an hour without observing like a flap of their wings. And they prefer to roost in high places where they can launch without, major efforts, wing flapping efforts. And Andean condors are often seen soaring near rock cliffs, using the heat thermals to aid them in rising in the air. Flight recorders have shown that about 75% of birds flapping was associated with takeoff, and just 1% of their time during the flight. And the proportion of time flapping is more short flights, and flapping between 2 or 3 thermal glides and more than 2 slope glides. And like other New World vultures, they have unusual usual habit of Eurohydrus, which basically they empty its cloaca onto its leg and feet, and that is cooled by evaporation. So basically helps keep them cool, and which has been proposed for this behavior. And because of this, their legs can often be streaked with a white buildup of uric acid, which is another interesting as well. They have a well-developed social structure within a large group of condors, and they do have a pecking order, which is often determined by body language and competitive play and vocalizations, with the mature males being at the top of the pecking order, while post-dispersal immature males tend to be near the bottom. So let's have a look at the babies while we talk about their breeding. So sexual maturity and breeding behavior does not appear in the Andean condor until the bird is about 5 to 6 years old. They may live up to 50 years and it mates for life. And during these courtship displays, the skin on the male's neck flushes from dull red to bright yellow and inflates. And then he approaches the female with his neck outstretched, revealing the inflated sac, and then hisses, and then extends the wing and starts clicking his tongue. And they will do hissing and clucking while dancing to impress the female. They tend to prefer roosting and breed on elevations at about 3,000 to 5,000 meters. In the nest, it typically consists of a few sticks placed around the egg, and creating on inaccessible ledges of rock. However, in coastal areas where there are few cliffs, they'll actually just make crannies and things like that scraped out of boulders on slopes. Then they will deposit one bluish white egg that weighs about 280 grams and is about 3 inches long. And breeding occurs every second year in the southern Andes around October, and the central northern Andes throughout the year. The egg will then hatch after about 54 to 58 days of incubation by both parents, and if the chick or egg loss is removed, another is laid in its place. And researchers and breeders take advantage of this behavior to increase that reproductive rate, where they take the first egg to hand rear it and then leave the second one with its parents. And the young are covered in a greyish down until they're almost as large as their parents, just like this. And they're able to fly after about 6 months, but continue to roost and hunt with their parents until age 2, and that's when they are displaced by the new clutch. So in terms of feeding, like many other species of vulture, they are a scavenger, where they inhabit large territories, travelling more than 200 kilometres a day, or 120 miles a day in search of carrion. They prefer large carcasses, and naturally they feed on llamas, alpacas, rheas, guanacos, deer, and armadillos. And wild individuals can actually get carotenoids from vegetable material and things like that in the carcasses, viscera, and things like that. However, more inland condors will actually live off larger domestic animals, such as cattle, pigs, donkeys, mules, sheep, and other domestic animals. Even introduced game like rabbits and foxes and red deer will be. And for those that live on the coast, they'll actually rely a lot on marine mammals, so large cetaceans. They will hunt on, scavenge on them as well, which is quite interesting. Coastal areas do provide a pretty good constant supply of food, and some condors will actually limit their foraging area to several kilometres of beachfront land. They locate carrion by spotting it or other scavengers, such as turkey vultures or yellow-headed vultures or the greater yellow-headed vulture, to encompass. And they actually forage by smell, detecting like ethanol, pretty much a gas which is produced by the decaying of dead animals. So it's called ethyl mecatan or something like that. The smaller vultures cannot actually rip into the carcasses, so that's why they rely on the big vultures to come down and rip it through, and then they can all scavenge together, which is really cool. And black vultures and several mammalian scavengers actually track those kind of vultures, which is interesting. So they track them around to try and find carcasses. And a study actually showed that condors were driving the ecology of pumas, as they actually were routinely stealing the kills from pumas, which is really interesting. We'll have a look at the male while we talk about this, because that's interesting. But yeah, very interestingly, they were taking kills off pumas because they were scaring them off. And they were able to harass them off and have been driven to increase their kill. And Andean condors are intermittent eaters in the wild and can often go a few days without eating. And they play quite an important role in their ecosystem to control, dead carcasses out, which can be a great way to spread disease. So they make sure that they're basically the cleaning crew. They make sure there's no big carcasses out in the world for too long. And also what's cool is they can also absorb quite a variety of carotenoid pigments from the vegetal material within the viscera of the carcasses. So that allows them to have that flush of yellow skin and the colour of their irises and bright orange tongues. And captive condors have this lower concentration because their diet is usually just restricted to flesh. And an analysis of droppings of wild condors showed that 90% contained vegetal material, and that those contained vegetable, a lot of them were primary vegetable matter, which is likely just eaten out of the carcasses. Like they eat the stuff out of the stomach that was a digesting of large herbivores that they're eating. So they hope that's something that's kind of kept along. But yeah, really, really cool how they kind of work in the ecosystem. It's a great example of like mutual, dependence on other species. Since they find the carcasses for the condor, but the condor can break it apart because it's bigger and stronger, and give it a little bit for everyone, which is quite cool. In longevity, they are a slowly maturing bird, and they have no known natural predators. And the Andean condor is quite long-lived. They have been seen to live potentially over 50 years. And the longest living bird with any confirmed lifespan in 1983 was a condor that had died just after surviving 70 years in captivity. Though several species of parrots have been ruled to live potentially over 100 years old. That's on a third the size. Another early captive bird lived for 71 years, so they are very long-lived birds. And we'll talk about that little bit of conservation here. So they are considered vulnerable by the IUCN and the Peruvian Conservation Organization. So, in result of research of its plight, its status was changed from vulnerable to near threatened in 2020, where only about 10,000 individuals remain. It was first placed on the endangered species list in the US in the 1970s, a status which just means animals are dangerous to any significant portion of its range. So one of the big issues that affects these guys is, like many other species of vultures, loss of habitat, secondary poisoning from animals killed by hunters or prosecution, and it's threatened mainly the northern area of its range. As I mentioned, it's quite bare in Venezuela and Colombia, where it's been declining. And because they're so big, live so long, and have such low reproductive rates, they are quite vulnerable to human persecution, which stems from the fact they are perceived as a threat as farmers to their livestock. But luckily, education programs have been helping with that. Also, reintroduction programs using captive bred Andean condors, which are bred in North American zoos, have been used to bolster populations. And like what they did with the California condor, they basically took the first egg and raised it by humans, and tried to keep it as natural as possible. And then they left the parents to raise the second egg. So it's a great way, and they use gloves and things like that to prevent them from imprinting on humans. So they wanted to keep them wearing from humans. And then they're taken down to the native range, kept in aviaries, and given time to acclimatize before they are released into the wild. And in response to the capture of all the wild individuals of the California condor, they actually used a few Andean condor and released them into California to kind of test the hypothesis and see if it works. They used only females to prevent them becoming an invasive species, but this experiment was a success, and all the Andean condors were recaptured and re-released into South America before they released the California condors back into the wild. That's quite cool. And we talk about their culture. They're actually quite a national symbol in Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, and all those places that they've found. Their important role in the mythology of the South American Andes regions, and have been like associated with sun deities and believed to be a ruler of the upper world, and they seem to be a symbol of power and health and things like that. So they are quite important in that culture, which is really, really cool. So yeah, another really cool species that we get to talk about. So really, really happy with that one there. So that's another Great Cakes mod, which is really, really awesome, and nice to see some more condors. I love talking about the big condors. So next up, we've got the white-tailed prairie dog, done by Pork. I think it's Pork 13, or I'll just refer to them as Pork. So we got the white-tailed prairie dog. So the white-tailed prairie dog is found in western and Wyoming and western Colorado and small areas of eastern Utah and southern Montana. The largest population is in Wyoming, where they're colloquially known as the Chiselers. This prairie dog species lives in an elevation of about 5,000 to 10,000 feet, generally in higher elevations than typical of other prairie dog species. And their predators include the black-footed ferret, badgers, and golden eagles. So the white-tailed prairie dog, as you can see, is tan in color with large eyes and a dark patch on their cheeks and below each eye. So very similar, for the most part, to the black-tailed prairie dog, of course, but it's got a white tail instead of a black one. Simple. The black prairie dog species weighs between 28 to 53 ounces, or about 790 to just over a kilo and 1.5 kilos, and have a length of between 12 to 16 centimeters, or about 30 to 41 centimeters, or 12 to 16 inches. They do display, very interestingly, interspecific competition with the Wyoming ground squirrel. When the squirrels enter the territory of the prairie dog will chase the squirrel. Rarely does this prairie dog capture and kill the squirrel, but when it does, it leaves the squirrel for avian predators, as these guys are herbivores. Female right prairie dogs who kill squirrels have actually increased litter size, but the higher her body count, the lower her chances of surviving each subsequent attack. They are diurnal, and they spend most of their time being active in the afternoon and in the morning, so you could say they're crepuscular a bit. The species also does hibernate in the winter seasons within their burrows and emerges to the surface in warmer seasons. Male white-tailed prairie dogs will emerge in late February and early March, while females will emerge about roughly 2 to 3 weeks later. In terms of their diet, white-tailed prairie dogs are herbivorous, similar to other species of prairie dogs. They feed mainly on grass, forbs, and sedges. And in terms of their lifestyle, white-tailed prairie dogs have a complex social system and live in colonies, and this species uses visual signs and barks for communication. On average, each colony has 6 different clans or families, and these families will forage together for food and resources. And the female white-tailed prairie dog and their pups are sedentary, meaning they stay close to their burrow while the male seeks the food. So they can not hang around too much. So let's have a look at these cute little babies while we talk about them. In terms of their conservation status, they have decreased quite dramatically, and the remaining population is believed to occupy only about 8% of their original range. They are subject to population controls by humans, shooting and poisoning, and they're threatened by a disease called the Salvatic Plague, which infects all species of prairie dog. This animal lives in small communities and that are vulnerable to being wiped out by all these issues. And the species appears to be IUCN as a status of least concern, and pensions have been made to protect the white-tailed prairie dog, but they've been denied by the United States Fish and Wildlife Service due to insufficient data on the current population trends. The denial is being reconsidered, though, as the formerly distant Deputy Assistant Secretary Julie MacDonald has been found to improperly influence the science basis of denial. And then groups are trying to work to protect the species. So it is considered least concern, and they are still relatively common, you could say. They just don't occupy much of their range anymore, and they're not critically endangered. But yeah, that's definitely something to worry about, because prairie dogs in general have really declined a lot as farmland kind of took over, and it also caused the near extinction of the black-footed ferret, which is another sad conservation story. But yeah, really, really cool. Nice to see a prairie dog. Nice to see some animals that don't get a lot of love get some. So next up, we have got by Monsoon. We've got the Diademed Sifaka. So it's another nice to see a cool Sifaka mod. So it looks really, really cool. I do love a Sifaka. So this is the Diademed Sifaka, which is an endangered species of Sifaka and one of the lemurs endemic to certain rainforests in eastern Madagascar. Along with the Indri, this species is actually one of the two largest living lemur species, with an average weight of about 6.5 kilograms and two adult lengths of about 105 centimeters, or about 41 inches, half of which is their tail. Russell Mitminer, one of the contemporary authorities on this lemur, has described this lemur as one of the most colourful and attractive species, having a long silky coat. They're also known in Malagasy as the Simpona, Simponi, and the Akomba jobi, with the term Diademed Sifaka is used as a group designating for 4 different subspecies. So in terms of being able to distinguish them from other species, they are pretty easy to distinguish because of their characteristic markings and their large size. Their entire coat you can see is like a moderately long, silky, and luxuriant. The white fur accompanying its muzzle, you can see, is kind of covering its cheeks, its forehead and chin, engenders the diadem or crown appearance. So it's good to call it the crown Sifaka, but I believe there's already a crown Sifaka. Its eyes are reddish brown. Its muzzle you can see are quite short, and its face is a black in coloration. So it's probably hard to get a good look at that one there. So let's have a look, and we can see one in the light. There's got to be one in the light that we can look at. They're probably going to go grab some food anyway, and you can see them hopping. Look at how great that looks. I like these guys. There we are, that's a good look. Good look at the eyes. Really, really cute. Anyway, the crown fur you can see is quite black and often extends down the nape of the neck, as you can see as well. And the upper body is like a slant grayish, although the lower back is lighter in color, which is like a silver color. The flanks and tail are paler grey, and hands and feet are entirely black, while the arms, leg, and the base of the tail are kind of like a real yellowish golden hue. And only the male is endowed with a large cutaneous gland, which is in the centre of the throat, which feature is typically reddish brown, which I don't think you see on this. So its range and habitat is actually one of the most widely distributed members of the genus Propithecus. And definite mapping of its range is not actually being conducted, but they seem to occur between 200 and 800 meters elevation throughout the eastern Madagascar lowland forests, and from about 18 to 1500 meters of the mountain Madagascan humid forests. These two ecoregions have been designated as a global 200 ecoregion, which is the most significant for conservation. And geographically, their range extends at least from the Manarara River to Northern Olive and Mongoro rivers. And one set of researchers actually recorded a clonal variation between this guy and Propithecus edwardsi, which is the Miller's Edward Sifaka, and the extreme southern portion of their range. And as with all Indri species, the species in the tiny genus has evolved in Madagascar independent of other mainland Africa species. So it's been isolated there. An anomalous outlier population has been discovered in south central Madagascar, and the members of this population do have different colour markings. The DNA has not resulted in consistent results of whether they should be a new species. The scientists have decided to classify this outlier group as the species until it requires further evidence, or further evidence comes to distinguish it as a different species. And to talk about its behaviour, so the Diademed Sifaka forms groups of typically about 2 to 10 individuals, which includes multiple males and females, and each troop defends a home territory of about 25 to 50 hectares, or about 62 to 125 acres, using perimeter scent marking made by both males and females. Although the Diademed Sifaka defends a group territory strongly among other member species, it shares it with other species. And they've actually thought to traverse the greatest daily path relative to other family members in patrolling its foraging, attaining a typical travel distance of 1.6 kilometers or a mile a day. And to accomplish this, their diet is high in energy, and they eat lots of diverse plant species, each day consuming over 25 different species of plant. And this diurnal lemur further diversifies its diet by not only eating fruits, but certain flowers, seeds, and leaves that are varied depending on the season. For a large lemur, they are actually quite athletic and are capable of lateral aerial propulsion. So basically, they're really good at jumping, and up to about 30 kilometers an hour, as a result of muscle leg thrusting action pushing off from a vertical tree trunk And it's possible, although not proven, that this vigorous health characteristics is enhanced by high consumption of two plants that are high in alkaloids. And they're quite an arboreal species, so they're actually not often found on the ground, and they're more of a vertical climber and a lateral leaper. And they also make a warning call that sounds like a kiss sneeze, and where terrestrial predators are perceived, and the sole predators of the species are the fossa and the Nile crocodile. Sexual maturity typically occurs about 2 to 3 years of age, and you will use that to talk about the cute little baby. About 2 to 3 years of age is when they have that sexual maturity, with the males maturing somewhat more slower than the female. Little is known about mating behavior, although it's believed the female is receptive to mating only a few days per year. Being dominant, the female that has the greatest input on mate selection. So in lemur societies, it's the males that are the females are the boss. Copulation occurs in the summer, around December, and the expected number of births is 1 offspring per female per year. So the female gets to choose the best mates and has the best babies kind of based on that. So we'll talk about their conservation issues. So they are sadly considered critically endangered, and as the year 2002, their population is believed to be between 6 to 10,000 individuals. The primary threat is habitat reduction due to the shifting cultivation by native peoples. The threats is also present even in national parks, which is significantly distant from the central government, where they can't really enforce these laws. Pressures of population growth in central and eastern Madagascar has caused many of the rural poor to seek subsistence by seizing whatever forest lands they have available and undertaking slash and burn tactics. And results of such land use often use meager yieldings, using small amounts of charcoal, firewood, and grass crops for grazing for zebu, which is quite interesting. But yeah, another really cool species of lemur that we get, and also, as I mentioned, the second largest. It'd be really cool to get an Indri mod. That'd be very interesting, because Indri are not very common in captivity, but they're also like the largest lemur alive today, so that'd be quite a cool one to see. But yeah, this is still a great animal regardless, and nice to see it hopping around like a normal Sifaka. That's quite awesome. So next up, we've got some more great cakes mods. We've got the Honshu Sika deer, so we'll quickly talk about that. Let's have a look at these guys. I'm actually going to turn my thing up a bit more. Getting a bit hot in here. Anyway, we'll carry on. So here's the Sika deer. So the Honshu Sika deer. Or Service Nippon centralis. That's the full subspecies name. So these guys are also known as the Japanese deer or the northern spotted deer. These guys are species of deer that are found across East Asia, but as I mentioned, the Honshu Sika deer is found in Honshu. Who would have guessed it? So the taxonomy on this species has been quite, they membered a group of the true deer, and they have been found to hybridize with other species as well, such as red deer and waipari and Sika deer. And there have been some populations introduced across the world, like in New Zealand and Argentina and Australia, and even North America. And there's quite a few different subspecies described. Centralis is from, as I mentioned, is from Honshu and is considered the smaller subspecies. I'll actually quickly check the Zoopedia on that exact information. They have the smaller subspecies with males weighing about 40 to 70 kilograms, or 90 to 150 pounds, and then females weigh about 30 to 40 kilograms, or 70 to 90 pounds. So it's kind of a difference with this species. We'll carry on having a look at the male, because he looks quite nice. They're actually one of the few deer, as you can see, do not lose their spot upon reaching maturity, and some subspecies kind of have larger, more obvious spots, and then some have lack them. So depending on the population, there's a bit of variety there. The colors of the pelts you can see can range a lot from light mahogany to black, with white individuals known, and during the winter it becomes a bit shaggier, and being medium sized as well. As I mentioned, there's a bit of variety there. So you're quite cool. You can see they've also got this quite upright antlers and extra buttress around the bow. You can kind of see that there. And the forward-facing intermediate tine breaks the line and is usually forked. And females actually can have a distinctive black bumps on their forehead, which is quite interesting as well. And it can be depending on the subspecies. So in terms of the behavior, they're active throughout the day, though in areas with heavy human activity, they will be more nocturnal, and they do migrate seasonally. Lifestyles will vary a lot between individuals, with some being found with others, while some living in same single-sex groups. Large herds will gather in autumn and winter, with males spending most years alone, occasionally forming herds together, with females with fawns only from herds during birthing seasons. And Sika males are quite territorial. They'll keep harems during the rut, which is from early September through November, but many last well into the winter. Territory size varies its habitat type and size for the buck, with strong males having up to 2 hectare or 5 acre territory, and territories are marked by shallow pits or scraped with these guys, and they also produce urinating areas because they have a strong musky odor. We'll have a look at the babies and talk about the gestation period. The gestation period for these guys is about 7 months, and hinds give birth to a single fawn weighing about 4.5 to 7 kilograms, which they nurse for about 10 months. The mother then hides her fawn in thick undergrowth immediately after giving birth, and the fawn will stay very quiet and still wait and sit still until the mother comes back to nurse it. The fawn will then become independent about 10 to 12 months after birth and obtain sexual maturity at about 16 to 18 months. And the average lifespan is about 15 to 18 years of captivity, though there's one that's been recorded to live up to 25 years old. And in Japan, which is funny because they're from Honshu, they're also known as the bowing deer, as they bow their heads before being fed deer cookies, quote unquote. However, this is actually thought to be a threatening thing as they're getting ready to headbutt. However, therefore, when a human bows, the deer actually takes it as a challenge, and then it turns the same stance, as a challenge. And deers headbutt both for play and to assert dominance, as do goats. So, and they're also found throughout the city of Nara and many parks and temples, and are considered to be messages of the Hindu gods. In terms of their habitats, the Sika deer are found in temperate and subtropical forests in Eastern Asia, preferring areas with dense climate understories, and they tend to forage in areas with patchy clearings. They've also been introduced into areas such as West and Central Europe, United States, Eastern United States, and New Zealand, as we mentioned. Japan has quite a large population of native Sika population, which is kind of considered the Sika deer. It's estimated to be about 170,000 to 330,000 due to the recent conservation efforts and the extinction of the Japanese wolf. And there's actually believed to be causing a problem. And so none of the subspecies are endangered except for the Kumana deer, which is considered slightly endangered. China used to have the largest population, but a lot of their hunting put that down. The South China Sika deer and Chironchika deer are the only subspecies known to remain in the wild in China, with small fragmented populations. The Formosan deer has been extinct for 2 decades before individuals in zoos were introduced, and then they were released there. And Russia does have a small population as well. As I mentioned, there's quite a few introduced populations around the place. We'll actually have a look at the female, and you can see a look at different variations there. So yeah, the introduced populations in the central... in the US, they've been found, Texas and Oklahoma, New Zealand, Australia. So they've been introduced for hunting as they're considered a game animal. And in some areas, they do interbreed, as I mentioned, with red deer and things like that, and hybridize with deers in the Cervus genus. So that's a bit of a worry. And in terms of hunting, across its original range in many areas it was introduced, it was considered quite a prized and elusive sportsman's quarry. And that's part of the reason why it kind of went a bit more endangered. And the natural predators of the species include tigers, wolves, leopards, brown bears, lynx, and golden eagles that'll eat fawns. And another cool thing as well is velvet antler is a popular ingredient for traditional Chinese medicine, and the Sika in China were actually domesticated long ago for the antler trade, along with several other species. And in Taiwan, both Formosan Sika deer and Formosan sambar deer have been farmed for their velvet antlers, and Japan is the only country in East Asia where Sika deer are not farmed for their velvet armor, and which is quite cool. But yeah, really, really awesome. So let's see what we can look at the Zoopedia and find out anything else. Other others we cover as well. Phylogenetic trees constructed by the sequences indicate that Japanese Sika deer is separated into 2 lineages. The northern Japan group, the Hokkaido Island and most of Honshu Island, and the southern part, which is the southern Honshu, the Kyushu Islands, and the small islands around there. So yeah, quite cool. I really do like this guy. Another really cool mod, another great cakes mod. And you get to look at all the different variation there. So yeah, second to last, we've got the Leaf, who's actually remade one of his older mods, but is really, really awesome this time. So we've got here the South American Coati. So the South American Coati, which is also known as the ring-tailed coati, there is a coati species and a member of the raccoon family that is found in tropical and subtropical parts of South America. So they're widespread, as I mentioned, throughout Central America, and they can be found in South America. So they can be found in lowland forests east of the Andes, in Colombia, as high as 2,500 meters, from Colombia to the Guianas and down into northern Argentina. An adult will generally weigh between 2 to 7.2 kilograms, or about 4.4 to 15 pounds, and be about 85 to 113 centimeters long, or 33 to 44 inches, with about half of that being tail. Their colors are actually highly variable, and this is kind of the more basic one, but you can get like lighter colors and darker colors and more orangey colored ones. And the rings on the tail are often always somewhat visible, but the most distinguishing characters, as you can see, is their largely white snout. It lacks the white snout of the white-nosed coati, which is its closest relative. And I will add as well, normally the tails kind of stick up, but I don't think Leaf did the rig editing for that one, so that might be a later update. But it's cool they just got it out regardless. These have been recorded in a few places as well, like Western Ecuador and West Colombia, so they are found as well. It was been naturalized on the island of Mallorca, which is actually considered invasive, which is interesting. And in terms of invasiveness, it's actually been introduced into Europe and has been listed in the invasive alien species of the Union concern since 2016. And the species cannot be imported, bred, translocated, and commercialized within the whole of the European Union. In terms of their diet and behavior, these guys are diurnal animals, so they'll live both on the ground and in the trees. They are omnivores and primarily eat fruit, insects, other small animals, and bird eggs as they search for fruit in trees in a high canopy and use their snouts to poke through crevices and things like that. Furthermore, they also search for animal prey by turning over rocks and ripping open logs with their claws. The South American coati has also been found to host a intestinal anthracocephalin parasite worm, which is interesting. It's got its own parasite species. Females will actually typically live in larger groups called bands that consist of about 15 to 30 animals. Males are usually solitary, though. Solitary males were originally considered to be a separate species due to their different social habitats and were called coatimundis, which is a term that is actually still used today. Neither bands or females nor solitary males defend unique territory, and they overlap as well. So basically, the females live in big groups and the males are solitary. Group members can produce soft whining sounds, but alarm calls are different, consisting of loud woofs and clicks, with coatis typically sleep in the trees, and an alarm call is sounded. They climb trees, then drop down to the ground and disperse. Predators include things like foxes, jaguars, jaguandis, and occasionally even humans. So we'll have a look at the cute little babies as we talk about their reproduction. That's not what we want to look at. We want to look at the baby. Look at the cute little baby. You know how cute he is. Anyway, all females come into heat simultaneously when fruit is in season and mate with several males. Typically, the gestation period is about 74 to 77 days, with estrus lasting about 1 to 2 weeks. Captive females give birth to about 1 to 7 young at a time, though in the wild they leave the group to give birth and nest in built-in trees, and then rejoin the group with their offspring about 5 to 6 weeks later. They usually remain with their natal group with the females, and the males generally disperse from their natal group at about the age of 3. And South American coatis generally live for about 7 years in the wild, but can live up to about 14 in captivity. And there is believed to be about 17 different subspecies, or 13, but I'm not sure how actually accurate that is. Subspecies, especially older subspecies, a lot of them have been described. Most of them are pretty much over 100 years old. Yep, all of them are over 100 years old, pretty much. So I'm not sure if they really count anymore, because some of them, they like to just add subspecies after subspecies. But yeah, really, really cool animal. Nice to see it getting a remaster. So we've got, like a new one. Hopefully get the tail sticking up, and hopefully get a white-nosed coati as well. And I do love seeing the variations. If you look at the Nexus mod page, we'll see all the different variations it has. So it's a really great way to represent that. We'll actually have a look at you climbing down, because why not? Look at it. Quite cool. I'm a big fan of this guy. And it's based on the raccoon, which is actually a much closer relative, and I think works quite good for the coatimundi. But yeah, quite cool. So last but certainly not least, we're going back to the Pleistocene of Australia. We have got here the Diprotodon. So let's see if we can find this is the big male. Yeah, because this is the male with 100% size. So this is as big as you'll get. Really, really enormous. So Diprotodon, which means two protruding front teeth, is an extinct genus of marsupial from the Pleistocene of Australia and consists of one single species, Diprotodon optatum. And the earliest finds date between 1.7 to 780,000 years ago, and they believe to have gone extinct only about 40,000 years ago. And it was first unearthed in Wellington Caves, New South Wales, where contemporary paleontologists guess they were either rhinos, elephants, hippos, or dugongs, which is quite interesting as we get into that. So in 1830, farmer George Rankin actually found them in the Wellington Caves, and this was the first major site for Australian megafauna. And at this time, these fossils were discovered. They thought they were the remains of rhinos and elephants, things like that. But it was found that they actually looked at the mandible and incisor. Richard Owen, who was a prominent, naturalist at the time, actually compared those to wombats and hippos, and described a new genus Diprotodon, where it was considered to be Diprotodon optatum to be the first species. So two protruding teeth, and optatum means desire or wish, and was the first ever fossil mammal to be described. And in 1843, they found more in Darling Downs, and actually thought it was an elephant, synonymized with Dinotherium and Mastodon, but actually is not related to them as well. But the incisors pointed to actually being a marsupial, so it's more closely related to a kangaroo than it is to a mastodon, which is very interesting. And there's been huge assemblages of mostly complete Diprotodon fossils found since, so it's a very well-known animal, which is quite good. And we do have lots of, fossils in the lake beds. We do have evidence of their kind of behavior. It's really, really cool how much we actually know about Diprotodon. And it was actually split into many other species in the 19th century, but a lot of these now have been based and lumped back into Optatum because a lot of them are thought to be sexual dimorphism, or because they're skeletally pretty much indistinguishable. So males, larger males, smaller females, things like that, potentially, regional variation. So a lot of them have been lumped back into this one species. So in terms of its phylogeny, it is from the order Diprotodontidae and the suborder Verbatiformes. So it's related to wombats and koalas. And basically its closest living relatives are wombats. But a lot of its relatives are extinct these days. And in 1872, American mammalologist Theodore Gill actually described the superfamily Diprotodontidae to hold this group, and then it's been divided up since. And there's lots of extinct large kind of wombat-like large herbivores, with Diprotodon being the largest of them all. And Diprotodontidae is actually one of the most diverse members, and they were really well adapted for basically that large herbivore role. So they spread across a lot of landscapes in Australia, and it lasted tens of millions of years. And Diprotodon has actually been found in every Australian state, so it is the most widespread of all the Australian megafauna, so it's a really huge range. The oldest verbatiform is Mercampara, which was described in 2020 from the Oligocene, so lived about 26 to 25 million years ago. It was about 150 kilos, so still quite large, but much smaller than Diprotodon. And both Diprotodonts and zygomaturines were actually found being quite diverse during the Miocene and Oligocene, and they kind of did their thing, and they all trended towards gigantism. So they're all getting larger to better deal with a drying climate, but also get more nutrients out of the low-quality foods they're eating. And gigantism seemed to evolve 6 times in this lineage, and Diprotodon was the largest of them all. And Diprotodon is believed to come from an early ancestor called Arizygomata, which was discovered in the Pliocene of Eastern Australia and kind of went going since. And in general, the actually poor resolution of the ages of Australian fossil sites, and they suggest Diprotodon lived from about 1.7 to about 40,000 years ago, so just about 2 million years. The oldest directly dated Diprotodon comes from the Middle Pleistocene, but there's others kind of around the place. So we'll talk a little bit more about its anatomy. So it has quite a long, narrow skull, and like other species of marsupial, the top skull is often depressed over the small brain case and sinuses, which is quite interesting. And its brain is only 4% of the skull's volume, with marsupials generally having a smaller brain-to-body ratio than placental mammals, which is interesting. And it's believed to be because having a large brain is quite calorie expensive, so saving a little bit of power. They're basically on power-saving mode. What's really cool as well is their jaws. So you see that they don't look very much like jaws of like other large mammals of its kind of size and things like that. But they do have quite large muscles, which is responsible for closing the jaw. So they seem to have quite powerful jaws and large incisors as well. And it's believed to be their chewing strategy would actually be more similar to kangaroos and wombats, with a powerful vertical crunch and a transverse gliding motion. So a little bit more eating, more like kangaroos than wombats. And another marsupial is the ramus of the mandible, actually goes up the skull. And it actually suggests that they would prevent the incisors from moving independently. So unlike kangaroos, which they can better control their incisors. So there's a little bit of stuff going on there just to talk about how they eat. They're very interesting molars. The incisors are scalpiform, which are chisel-like those of wombats and rodents, and they do grow continuously throughout their lives, so they don't need to worry about losing teeth. And the premolars and molars are bilodont, which is having two distinct ridges, which are triangular and about half the size of the molars. And they're actually quite variable even within the same individual, so it depends on how they use them and things like that, which is quite interesting. In terms of its limbs, they actually scapula is more similar to things like monotremes and birds and reptiles and marsupial and placental mammals, which is quite interesting. They also have ilia, which is the large wings of the pelvis, are laminiform, and only been recorded in elephants, sloths, and apes. So it's kind of a great example of convergent evolution, probably due to dealing with large size. Their long bones are actually quite straight rather than S-shaped, which is better adapted for dealing with heavy weight, which is quite interesting. And so it's a great example of convergent evolution as well. They had straighter long bones to better deal with their weight since they got quite a bit bigger. And in terms of their paws, they are 5 digits on either paw. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They are plantigrade walkers, so they don't walk on their digits, they walk on their heel, like humans, bears, things like that. And their digits are actually proportionally weak, so they had a lot of padding, and their wrist and ankle would have been largely rigid and inflexible. The forepaws were strong, and the shape of their wrist bones are actually quite similar to those of kangaroos. Like other vombatiformes, the metacarpals, which connect the finger to the wrists, are similar to those of kangaroos and allies, with a large pistiform bone takes up half of the jolting surface of the ulna, which is quite interesting as well. In terms of size, as we'll mention, so this is all adaptations to deal with being so big. So Diprotodon was considered the largest marsupial to have ever lived. In life, it's believed to have reached about 160 to 180 centimeters, or just under 6 foot at the shoulder maximum, and about 275 to 340 centimeters, or about 9 to 11 feet from head to tail. And even some, looking at the cartilage, they may be a little bit longer and exceeded potentially 13 feet long. Researchers looking at the body mass, they actually tried to look and compare them. They suggested a mass of just over a ton, and they looked at linear regression between the largest herbivores on the continent, and suggested that landmass area, and calculated that the food requirement for Diprotodon was actually 50% smaller than the expected landmass. So they believe they have a greater lower metabolism than other species of placental mammals, or marsupials did placentals, and sparse and nutritious vegetation on other continents. So this maximal attainable size is capped much lower than those on other continents. So being Australia and dry and stuff, animals can get like elephant size and things like that. But in 2003, they actually looked at a more sophisticated approach in trying to figure out the actual size. They put in different long bones and tried to look, and the results actually suggested between 2,272 to 3,470 kilograms, or about 5,000 to 700 pounds, with a mean of about 2,686 kilograms, or about 6,000 pounds, which is kind of those suggested that the weight of extinct creatures that far outweighed living counterparts is problematic. And for comparison, a bison weighs about just over a ton, and then a hippo weighs just under 2 tons. So it basically puts it in the same sign range as a hippo or a bison, even bigger than that. So we don't know exactly the size, but 2 tons I think does sound like reasonable considering its size. In terms of its diet, like most modern mega herbivores, these guys would have quite a profound effect on their habitat. Looking at the carbon isotopes that we have of these guys suggested that they ate a broad variety of shrubs and grasses and trees, like kangaroos. So they ate both C3 and C4 plants, including arid grasses. So they were a mixed feeder. So they pretty much just had that seafood diet. They see food, they eat it, kind of thing. And the molars, as I mentioned as well, are very similar to those of kangaroos. So these guys would have been able to grind tender, low-fiber plants as well as being able to graze on grass. And it's believed that kangaroos might have specialized it and they had such adaptations for grazing that Diprotodon did not have, which would be more of a mixed feeder. And may have also chewed like wallabies, which is quite interesting. And similar to many large ungulate species, the jaws of Diprotodon were actually better suited for crushing rather than grinding, which is quite cool. And they actually did research onto the bite force that could be produced from the Diprotodon, and they calculated it was about 2,374 newtons in incisors of between 4 to 11,000 across the molar series. So, and for a comparison, American alligator can produce about 9,500 newtons, which is likely overestimates, but still comparable to an American alligator. Quite strong jaws, able to break woody stems and branches and things like that. So great for being a mixed feeder. Another really cool thing as well is that looking at the isotope ratios as well, they actually found that these guys make seasonal migrations. So they would have moved around the continent. And while apparently keeping darling down through that 3 years, this tooth had been growing. So they actually had treks that paralleled the mammalian mass migrations of modern day East Asia, and the only metatheria that has been proven to migrate, and a few modern marsupials have been observed making migrations, but not have been seasonally in occurrence. So these guys may have just migrated across the place, being so large and moving around the continent and migrating seasonally, probably just to get moved to better places for food, similar to like wildebeest and stuff do today, which is quite cool. And there's also evidence that suggests they would have moved in quite large herds. Possible fossilized herds that have been most commonly unearthed in southeastern Australia that seem to be mostly or entirely female and have sometimes travelled with juveniles. Such sexual segregation is normal in these kind of species, and organisation actually is quite similar, of things like elephants and buffalo and things like that, with, the females moving together in a herd, or males either move into bachelor herds or are solitary, so that does fit out as well. And like modern red kangaroos, which also sexually segregate, bachelor herds of Diprotodon may have actually been less tolerant to drought conditions due to their larger size and nutritional requirements. That's quite interesting. So it's similar to, modern kangaroos as well. There's also a lot of footprints that have been found that actually look at the gait, and the locomotion has been observed from the tackaways and other extinct species of Diprotodonts that actually had semicircular or like kidney-shaped four-pawn print that are more kidney-shaped at the back as well. And they seem to have a much more erect gait, which is an adaptation for long-distance travel, which is more similar to that of elephants. So they were standing upright like elephants and other large, big mammals, rather than the squat kind of positions of wombats and its earlier relatives, which were still large, but not multiple tons like Diprotodon was. And they seem to have an average stride of about a foot, or about 430 millimeters, and they could move at about 6 miles per hour, like just walking around potentially. A single Diprotodon responsible for the impression in the volcanic plain had an average stride length about 4 feet, and at about 3 feet as well, so just over a meter. Its posture was much more splayed than the example of Calabalana, which is aligned with more what you said in Zygonomactris. And this animal may have actually been a female carrying a joey in her pouch, which the added weight altering her gait, which is quite interesting. And they kind of were moving towards this paleo lake, which is quite cool. In terms of its life history, the marsupial metabolic rate is actually 30% lower of placental mammals due to lower body temperature of about 34 to 36 degrees. Marsupials will also give birth in an earlier point of fetal development, so we'll have a look at the babies. They're quite cute. No, that's the adult. We want to look at the babies. So the babies are born much earlier. They're born and then go into a pouch, and they rely on lactation for most of the development because pregnancy is much more energy expensive so they invest in lactation rather than having the long gestation periods of placental mammals. And that's good because it can be advantageous in highly seasonal and unpredictable climates. which is interesting. And consequently, they cannot have large litter sizes or a shorter generation time, potentially. Based on the relationships between body size and life history in kangaroos, it's believed to be in a 1-ton Diprotodon female would have gestated for about 6 to 8 weeks, given birth to a 5-gram joey, but given its massive size, it may not have sat down to give birth as do smaller marsupials, probably standing instead. And like koalas and wombats, its pouch may have actually faced backwards, so the joey can crawl across its mother's abdomen and enter and attach itself to a teat until it could see. Potentially, perhaps 260 days, and thermoregulate. It would have permanently left the pouch until after about 180-60 days. So a few years, actually. So they would have been pregnant for a lifetime. And suckled until they reached 270 kilograms or 600 pounds at about 4 to 5 years. And in larger kangaroos, females usually reach sexual maturity and enter estrus soon after weaning, with males needing double that time to reach sexual maturity. And a similar pattern could have been exhibited in Diprotodon, assuming a lifespan of about 50 years. They could have given birth about 8 times in their life. So yeah, very interesting that we know so much about, their ecology there. Let's have a look at the lady here. So yeah, she would have a pouch that faced backwards, like wombats. So sometimes you can see pictures of wombats, with a little head sticking out their back, because that's just the baby's pouch. And yeah, it's very interesting how they, at 180-60 days, they would have permanently left the pouch. That's like 2 or 3 years, I think. So 3, 6, about 2.5 years. We'll talk about paleoecology. So they did live across pretty much the entirety of the Australian continent in the late Pleistocene. The onset of the glaciation in the Quaternary would have varied in Australia. So warmer, wetter interglacial predators would have been periods received with forests and woodlands, and then drier times would have been more grasslands and deserts. So they would have ebbed and flowed along with that as well. And the continent-wide distributions of Diprotodon intends they could trek across any habitat, much like modern elephants south of the Sahara. Diprotodon was a member of a diverse group of assemblage of megafauna that include Thylacine, modern kangaroos, the giant short-faced kangaroos like Procoptodon, a diverse array of giant wombat and koala relatives, the tapir-like Paleochansis, Megalania, which is a giant, lizard, or Megalania, the Varanus pictus, giant monitor lizard, Mahalonia, which is a giant turtle, Gestornis, which is a giant extinct, thunderbird or, demon duck, and another Diprotodon, Zygomaturus, which would have remained in the forest, and these guys would have been a little bit more grassland adapted. These guys also would have been predated upon potentially by Thylacileo, which has actually got a mod for this game as well, the largest known marsupial predator, which would have potentially eaten babies or young Diprotodon. And it's unclear if they could kill a 2-ton Diprotodon, but they may have been able to kill young Diprotodon, not adults, but then also they've been seen potentially as well. Though larger predators that would have been more of a worry with things like saltwater crocodiles, extinct crocodiles like Quickalania and Palodyrex, and Megalania, which potentially could have preyed on even adult Diprotodon, as Komodo dragons can hunt, buffalo and things like that. So that could have been a threat even for adult Diprotodon. And they became extinct. They were actually one of the first extinctions, sadly, at the end of the Ice Age. So part of the Quaternary event, pretty much every Australian animal larger than 100 kgs became extinct. It's a lot of people are curious what happened, and they went extinct a lot, as I mentioned, with giant wombats, the Thylacileo, Procoptodon, a lot of those really cool, big Australian megafauna went extinct about 47 to 46 million years ago, or about 50 to 41 million years ago, thousand years ago. And they think it could have been done with climate change or humans. So it's kind of the big thing with the Ice Age mass extinctions. Was it humans? Was it climate change? Or was it disease? In the Australian case in particular, it's kind of gone back and forth between people. So obviously there would have been a lot of climate changes that they dealt with before. So they may have been in areas, where they would have been slightly, less populated due to the interglacial. And then humans come and finish them off because they're such big animals with slow reproductive rates. It'd be pretty easy to kill them off. So it most likely was a combination of both, and you could say one fed into the other because there's lots of evidence of Aborigines or First Nations people actually going through and burning forests, which obviously causes climate change. So it could have been not necessarily one or the other. They weren't necessarily hunting them. They could have just destroyed their habitat and having these controlled burns. So it is kind of whether humans or climate did it. It was likely a combination of both factors, and it depends on where in the world you are. In Australia, it seems like potentially from 60,000 to about 40,000 years ago, it went through a great drying event. So potentially that could have caused the extinction of a lot of these big megafauna, along with the arrival of humans, like tipping it over the edge. But you can't really say for sure, but both of those factors would have definitely contributed potentially to their extinction. And there's actually some evidence suggests they may have actually, coexisted for about 20,000 years with megafauna, so they couldn't have drove them off that quickly if they lived for about 20,000 years together. That's a long time. But yeah, in terms of fossil evidence, they are found around the place. There's believed to be paintings of humans that are made of these of Diprotodon, and there's lots of different fossils and things that have been found. It's just quite well known actually around Australia. There's lots of fossils found, so it's quite a well known species. And some people actually believe that it could be alive today, with some associating it with the cryptid the Bunyip, which is a large carnivorous lake monster, which is actually believed to be tribal memories of things like Diprotodon and things like that, which is quite interesting. And yeah, as mentioned, there are paintings of original petroglyphs that could be from Diprotodon. So yeah, it's quite an animal that's quite interesting, and we could know quite a lot about, and we do know quite a lot about. But yeah, really, really awesome. Another great cakes mod. So I think this would be a great place to end the video. We'll have a look at the big male. That's not the big male. There he is. So yeah, really awesome mod. I really love Diprotodon. It's such a cool animal. But yeah, I think this is a great place to end the video. So thank you, Great Cakes mod. Thanks you, Pork, Monsoon, Leaf. All you guys have done a really awesome job. Great Cakes mod, I've done a wonderful job with a lot of these mods today. So yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to get the little bell icon to get notified of anything. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.